Okay, guys, so I'm going to start this lecture by just kind of giving a few applications, business applications of the techniques that we're going to be covering today. And this is primarily we're going to be working with visualization tools and cluster analysis tools. Visualization is just showing business entities and how they're related to one another, and cluster analysis is we're kind of grouping either things like customers, products, brands, etc. So basically, when I talk about segmentation, traditionally we've looked a lot at customer segmentation, grouping customers. So grouping and looking, for example, of a group of high income, fashion conscious, urban females. That would be an example of a customer segment. We could also segment by products. For example, the hybrid crossover SUVs are a segment of cars within the car market. And I've taught international marketing before, and we think about maybe segmenting countries. We're thinking of very similar countries, culturally or economically. And we're going to be covering several techniques in this class. We're going to be covering methods of visualization, and I also put in kind of here dimensionality reduction. What does that mean? Well, basically, the human mind can only kind of visualize in 2 or 3 dimensions. And in fact, trying to visualize in 3 dimensions, you can end up with a bit of a mess. So generally, we're taking lots of business data and we're trying to squash it into 2 dimensions. So that's kind of the first examples I show in the computational exercises. We'll start with some scatter plots and we'll look at this kind of idea of dimensionality reduction. And then we use cluster analysis, and cluster analysis is a computational tool for grouping. And again, we will look at doing this manually in 2 dimensions, and then we will look at more complex data where we have lots of different pieces of information, and we're trying to, for example, segment customers or segment products. So a lot of this stuff comes from marketing. I'm sure you can think of like examples in other areas, for example, segmenting different types of people that you're auditing or segmenting different types of firm, but a lot of the drivers of this stuff comes from marketing. And segmentation has been kind of a mainstay of marketing since the 1960s, particularly in terms of the examples I gave before, for example, targeting and understanding customers. A key thing with segmentation is this idea of segmentation bases. So we have things like demographics, age, ethnic group, level of education, things like, married, single, what's your salary, demographic and social economic factors. We also have lifestyle factors, how many hours do I exercise a week, what do I eat, etc. We can also have perceptual preference data. I could ask directly, how do you rate this specific car? Rate the different attributes on scales from 1 to 10. Or do I prefer the Nissan Sentra or the Hyundai Accent? So we ask people to give a series of comparisons of different brands and whether they prefer brands. But we also have probably the most accurate is behavioral data. So particularly, obviously, it's hard to do this with cars because, you buy a car, you buy another car 5 years later, the market's changed. But we can look a little bit at particularly for kind of consumer goods, for groceries, we can look at kind of behavioral data. We can look at, the goods people buy each week. We could look for patterns in that. So we can segment products that are competing with one another, and we can segment consumers. So here's an example of a type of segmentation. And I actually give you a little exercise for the class exercise on Tuesday, where I have you get the Prism segmentation for your local neighborhood. And all we're doing here is Prism kind of looks at different neighborhoods and looks at people within these neighborhoods and actually kind of segments them into very specific segments. It actually names the segment. So we have this segment of upper crust people, the blue blood estates, which I imagine is like old money living in nice big houses in the suburbs. And then we go down to things like affluentials, executives, pools and patios, and each of these segments has kind of got a description. So the idea is marketeers would understand which segment you're in, and then they would have specific value propositions or specific adverts to aim at the different segments. And we're basically looking, and this is just a nice little graph that shows the different segments. 100 is your average, Amazon purchases, and basically saying which of these segments are more likely to purchase on Amazon and which of these segments are less likely to purchase on Amazon. And here's another example. This again is same from Walmart, and we actually look at the different segments. These are the numbered prism segments, and we look at relatively how many people order online from Walmart or shop at Walmart. So we can see that this particular segment, number 20, I don't have it to hand. They order from Walmart.com a factor of 3 times greater than the average. So again, this is very useful material for marketing. And here's a little example, and I'm just going to cut off now. Okay, so this is something I actually set up a few years back, and this was my attempt to put some Yelp information from the Yelp website, social media, on top of a segmentation solution. But interestingly, I seem to have created a backdoor into this commercial segmentation solution, so you can still view the actual segmentation solution. Though in Milwaukee, where I got the data from, you actually have my information on top of it. So let's just kind of have a look at this, and let's just think a little bit about the data that's in this map. So let's pick a metro that we know reasonably well. So let's pick the Birmingham metro, and let's pick kind of relatively affluent area, maybe south of downtown. And I think this is Mountain Brook. So this is the segment here is the top rung. So it tells you a little bit about the overall kind of segment, and medium household income of 182,000. Tells a little bit about the preferences, best of the best. Shop online for books and concert tickets. Avid readers of newspapers and magazines, and also consume news shows. So this was one of the segments, and let's just look a little bit closer down. I think this is near the UAB area, and then this is the young and restless segment, and we get similar information. Now this was actually a little bit, you could criticize this segmentation. It kind of gives one segment per geographical area. The Prism actually gives a breakdown of the different segments in the area, but I think it's kind of quite an interesting insight in consumer segmentation. So I linked to this map on the slides. So just find out where your home neighborhood is and see if you agree with the segmentation solution. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about in the class discussion. So I'll leave this a little bit. This was me talking about how people are being split into ever smaller segments. Here's an interesting consumer segmentation. And this was actually a segmentation for beer in South America. And we actually have one of my segmentation bases is how people consume. And the other is kind of the class of consumers. So we have male, female, age groups, urban, rural. We also have this. This is actually used quite commonly in Britain. This is like A, B, C, D, E. A is the top rung of professionals, lawyers, doctors, etc. B, maybe school teachers. C is the skilled manual workers, and D and E are kind of almost the working class and the underclass. I've never seen this used so much in America, but maybe we're not quite so class conscious over here. This is what I showed you in the first class, and this is linked to the Oracle Data Cloud. So just again, very scary just how much information can be pieced together about us from what we buy online, what we surf, basically our preferences for things like music, our preferences for holidays, and all these can be used to actually segment us as consumers. Okay, so we talked a little bit about consumer segmentation. We'll also talk about brand segmentation. And again, it was developed along with consumer segmentation in the 60s. I have a new product and I want to see where it fits in the market. Well, I'll run a survey. I'll look at the different features. I'll have consumers rate my concept on different features. And I'll do what's called a product positioning analysis, in that based on consumer evaluations or whether their consumers prefer my concept to another concept, we'll kind of see where my product fits and who it's competing closely with. And I'll actually give you an example of that in the exercises where we look at kind of ratings of different cars, and then we add a Tesla and we see, you know, which of the current brands of car the Tesla is competing with most closely. Okay, so here's just an example of what we call perceptual mapping, and this is where we combine a visualization with a segmentation solution. We're plotting our different brands on a two-dimensional map. This could be a basic segmentation solution. So for example, with cars, we could do things like the price point of the car and safety, but we could also use some quantitative tools, which we're going to cover, such as principal components analysis, where we're basically including lots of different segmentation bases. And we kind of put the segment on top of the perceptual map. So here's an example of this, where we have a perceptual map, and we have, this is cosmetics, and we have household income from low to high is one of our segmentation bases, and age from low to high is another one. Then we kind of place our different cosmetics brands on this map, and then we kind of circle the similar groups. So here we've got three different groups. We've got the direct shop brands, the luxurious brands, and we have the drugstore brands. And here's another thing. This is kind of a Chinese segmentation of different shops. I don't know these shops in China. And we have from low price to high price and from classic to trendy. And again, we wanted to go further, we could kind of split these into different groups. Another type of segmentation, country segmentation. We can group countries. We could use to maybe organize our sales territories. If we have a retailer, for example, Buffalo Wild Wings, we might want to group culturally and economically similar countries. So if we're already in the USA, we might want to find similar countries based on the economy and based on demographics and culture, and then decide to move into those countries next. We can actually kind of combine country segmentation with segmentation within the countries. So we can segment countries, and then we could look at different consumer segments, for example, you know, upper class, middle class, lower class, within those different countries. And again, we can segment countries based on their demographics, socioeconomic variables such as GDP per capita, how developed they are in things like, you know, education, levels of infrastructure, etc. And we can also segment based on, you know, the proportion of middle class in the country. We have developing nations may have a lot of wealth, but there's also a, you know, extreme difference between the wealthy and the poor. That they have a high degree of socioeconomic inequality. And if we're looking for a certain brand, so say for example, we're moving Buffalo Wild Wings, we may want to look at like, you know, market penetration of similar stores, so market penetration of fast food. So here's a little example of a segmentation for different countries, and this is for toothpaste. And we have 3 different countries, and we have the different kind of segments of the market, and we can see how the different segments of the market are doing relatively in different countries. So that's one example of a type of segmentation. Here's a kind of a very simple socioeconomic segmentation. As I said, when you could use GDP per capita to group countries, but that misses a lot of the subtleties. So here's a segmentation of Latin American countries where we actually don't just look at, say, the GDP per capita, but we split, you know, the upper class, the middle to upper class, middle class, and lower class. So we can see, for example, that Brazil has a small upper class, but has a very large lower level as subsistence class. And in fact, that's the same for most Latin American countries, except maybe Uruguay, which is a little bit more equal, a little bit more like a European country or North America. Okay, so the next section we're now actually going to go through and do a little bit of segmentation.